Hey guys, it's Whitney from All the Shelves. Last week I did my top 10 favorite novels of 2016, and since I read a lot of nonfiction, I kind of separate those lists out. So this week I am giving you my top 10 favorite nonfiction books of 2016. My 10th favorite nonfiction read this year was Ghostland, an American fiction in haunted places by Colin Dickey. Colin Dickey is part of a group of people, I think they're based in California, and I'm not going to remember the woman's name, but she just recently wrote a memoir about growing up like in a mortuary or working in a mortuary. I haven't read that one. Anyway, he's part of this society with that woman. I'm so full of details today. Where they're trying to promote talking about death in a way that is positive and productive, rather than being terribly afraid of death. And Ghostland was a really interesting read about places in America that are reportedly haunted. Not that Colin Dickey actually believes they're haunted, but he went and he researched these places and he visited them, not in a like ghost hunters kind of way, but to figure out the history of them and why we find certain places to be creepier than others, or why we decide that certain places are haunted, is just totally fascinating. So you learn a ton about American history, a ton about American psychology, and then plus it's just about ghosts and the supernatural, so it's also like a fun read. My 9th favorite nonfiction read was Fic, Why Fanfiction is Taking Over the World by Ann Jameson. I did a full review video for this book because I liked it so much. It was written by a professor of mine, someone that I consider a kind of mentor, so keep that in mind. I'm sure that that kind of colors the way that I was reading that book, but it was really good. And fan fiction is not something I knew anything about. When I was a kid, I participated in like X-Files, like RPGs on AOL chats, and I would read some X-Files fanfiction, but I was never aware that that's actually what it was called or what it was, or like the history, the very long history of fans writing stories about their favorite texts. So it was just really fun to read about how people interact with these certain stories, these certain narrative worlds that have just attracted so much. It's like the narrative worlds are so complete that people feel like they can go and they can live in these worlds, and it's this really cool kind of rebellious way of interacting with pop culture. It's subversive, and it's pornographic, and it's just really fun. So I loved Fic by Ann Jameson. My number 8 favorite book I read actually just last month, so it was in my December wrap-up, and it was People Who Eat Darkness by Richard Lloyd Perry. This was the story of Lucy Blackman, who went missing in Japan, and her parents, her father and her sister, going to Japan and just tried to gather interest in Lucy Blackman's case and how it became this media phenomenon. And it follows why she was in Japan, her kind of going missing, the whole investigation into her case, the discovery of her body, and then the prosecution of the man that they believe was responsible. So you just get all these little parts of Japanese culture and the Japanese legal system, and I just found this to be a completely engrossing true crime read. My 7th favorite book I actually do have here with me. I'm in the middle of a move right now. We actually just bought a house, so all my books are kind of blocked by boxes, and some of them are boxed up, and I obviously didn't want to like unpack my stuff to do a booktube video. But this one has escaped the packing boxes for now. It's Better for All the World. This is The Secret History of Forced Sterilization and America's Quest for Racial Purity by Harry Brewenius. I'm not sure how to say his name, but there it is if you can see it, brother. Anyway, this is a, I think, quite forgotten or looked over piece of American history. It centers in the 1930s or so, when eugenics was at the height of its popularity, and Americans were trying to find the way to create the perfect, genetically perfect, biologically perfect human being through breeding and through sterilization. It's a horrific time in our history. And I just feel like I didn't learn about this until maybe in my undergraduate schooling, but I don't think I learned about it till grad school, quite honestly. And to see the similarities that the United States had with other fascist countries that we often like to think that we are so far above, like, you know, Germany in the 30s, or Spain or Italy, or, you know, Japan or Russia. I mean, there's like, whatever, I don't want to create enemies here, but the United States often thinks like, oh, we had American values, like we, the Allies, were against the evil fascist countries in Europe, and it's just, we were participating in some of the exact same ideologies, and in fact those ideologies originated in the United States and were put into practice, just not in the same ways. So that book was totally interesting. It's an academic read, but there are enough personal stories in it that I think it would be interesting for anybody. My sixth favorite nonfiction book of the year is The Irony of American History by Reinhold Niebuhr. This is a pretty famous book. It's one that Obama has cited as being one of his favorites, and I can completely see why. It's just about how Americans, and this is probably true of other countries, but Niebuhr is talking about America, how they have this desire and this myth that they can control the workings of history by going and interfering in other countries' business, or interfering in their own social business, that they can direct the flow of history in a way that is just totally impossible. And he relates that to the communist desire and tendency to think the same thing, and how these are ways that both democracy and communism, or capitalism and communism, actually have a lot of similarities. He talks about the myth that Americans see themselves as innocent, and how that myth is another way of trying to control history. It's just a very complicated book, one that I will need to read again and again to fully understand, but I really appreciated the intellectual exercise that it forced me into. My fifth favorite nonfiction book was called The Worst Hard Time by Timothy Egan. The subtitle is The Untold Story of Those Who Survived the American Dust Bowl. This won a award. What was it? The Pulitzer? The Booker? The National Book Award? I don't know. It won an award a couple years ago. It's just about the Dust Bowl, and I knew the Dust Bowl was horrific, and I knew that it caused a lot of people to move, but I don't think I realized just how terrible it was. There are so many horrible stories in this book about people who are caught in dust storms and suffocate to death. Cows who, like whole herds of cattle that were dead because they had swallowed so much dust in a dust storm, and how you would go completely blind, and how cars wouldn't be able to work anymore. People stranded on highways just desperately trying to survive in the midst of these dust storms. And it talks about how they got there and what they did about it. Talks about FDR's efforts to control sublime nature, and how those were ultimately probably failures. It was just fascinating read, and totally in line with the stuff I was studying at the time, so I just really appreciated that one. Again, it's called The Worst Hard Time. I totally recommend it. My fourth favorite book of the year is H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. I listened to this on audio, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend the audio. Her voice is beautiful, but it's also kind of lulls you into a stupor. I found myself kind of cutting out a lot. But the book itself was fabulous. It's about her father. Helen MacDonald's father dies. It's a memoir. Her father dies, and suddenly she becomes obsessed with training a goshawk, which apparently are like notoriously difficult to train. I know nothing about hawking. Well, now I know a little bit about hawking because I listened to this book. But before I didn't, and I wouldn't say that I had much interest in it. I'm not very interested in hunting in general, and doing that with an animal seems like weird to me. I liked that this book kind of opened my eyes to that other kind of culture, and how beautiful that whole relationship between a woman and her hawk can be. And then she relates that both to her father's death and to a little biography of T.H. White, who I love, the Once and Future King, and it was just really interesting to learn about him. So it smashes all this stuff together, and it's lyrical and touching. I just loved H is for Hawk. My third favorite nonfiction book of the year I also read last month, and that is Columbine by Dave Cullen. I talked about this a lot in my December wrap-up video, so I don't want to rehash all of it here, but I've been reading a lot of true crime lately, and some of it is kind of like seedy and salacious, and sometimes I feel like it's just kind of exploitative. Like right now I'm reading The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, and while it's a fun read, it doesn't offer much sympathy for its victims in the way that this book, Columbine, really did. This is the definitive book on Columbine, and I would even say one of the definitive books on school shooters that I've read. It was just beautifully told, enough of a focus on the victims that it feels sincere and it feels like it does them justice, while at the same time it gives you enough about the killers that you want to know. Not that we should be heightening them up to be these like badass outlaw names, you know, but he goes into why they became what they became, and in doing so he uncovers a lot of the myths around Columbine, that these kids were bullied, that these kids were part of the trench coat mafia, that these kids had a bad home life. All of that stuff is not true, and once you get rid of those very easy myths, the story becomes even more disturbing and even more pressing, because if they're not bullied, like we have all of these anti-bullying campaigns at my school, the high school I teach at, it's like the I am the cure campaign, and it seems to work really well. I honestly haven't seen any instances of bullying in my classroom. I think that's just because I'm at this great school with these great kids, I don't know, but part of it I think is the success of these programs. But what happens when school shooters are not actually bullied? Where are they getting this from? Are they psychopaths? Are they depressed? Like, what is it? And Cullen goes into that, and it's really good book. My second favorite book that I read this year was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Everyone has been talking about this. I don't know what more I can add, but I think the big takeaway from his book that I think is shocking to a lot of people who haven't come across this idea for the first time is that race is a construct, that it's the difference between black and white is completely socially invented, and that it is socially invented by white people to maintain a place in a social hierarchy. And the way that he talks about that is brilliant. It's not a new idea to me. It's one I've thought about before, especially with like Toni Morrison stuff. But I just love that this book had such an impact, and I loved that he centers that idea on police violence and that it's a letter to his son. It is very much like Letter to My Nephew by James Baldwin, which is another beautiful read, and I love this as much as everyone else. The other thing I want to recommend is Ta-Nehisi Coates' My President Was Black. It was an article I believe he wrote for The Atlantic. Is it Salon or The Atlantic? The Atlantic, I think. Really long article. It took me maybe an hour to read, but well worth the read, about all of the particular qualities that Barack Obama had to have to achieve the level of power that he did, and how amazing that is. And Ta-Nehisi Coates is not optimistic that it will happen anytime in the near future. And he's very critical of the president at the same time as it's this laudatory, like, beautiful tribute to President Obama. So if you're able to this week with the inauguration, we're all going through a lot right now, and the farewell address and the Joe Biden getting Medal of Freedom. I mean, it's a lot of emotions for Democrats right now. But that article is like well worth the read if you can stand it. And my number one book of the year, I will not be packing because I have to consult it whenever I'm feeling bad, and that is Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. I had a whole video on books I love about Bruce Springsteen, but this one is just the definitive book. It came out this year. I love this cover so much. I love this image. But it's, in his own words, he's a poet. He's brilliant. I've been listening to parts of the audiobook too. I'm gonna listen to the whole audiobook because he reads it himself, and I just love memoirs read by the author, but especially obviously memoirs read by Bruce Springsteen. Like, Bruce Springsteen could read every memoir and I would enjoy it. I'm a fan. But word on the street is, my husband is listening to it right now, and he will sit outside in our driveway for like 10 minutes when he gets home from work because he just wants to listen to more of it. And he's a fan, like he's taken me to concerts and he's a trooper. But I wouldn't say that he's like a super Bruce Springsteen fan. He's got like the 40 songs he knows, and because I have forced him to know them, but he's not like obsessed with Springsteen the way I am, and he loves this book. So I hope that that's a testimony of like how good the writing actually is in the book. Celebrity memoirs can be iffy, and this one is one of the good ones. about how to achieve celebrity, about growing up in a working class environment and transitioning into a very wealthy environment and what you do with that. It's about like obsessiveness and control and letting go of that control. It's about fatherhood. It's about love and family connections. And it's just like, it's so good. And it's also about music and rock and roll. Like, how can you resist those things, right? I just loved this book. It made me cry 5 times. I would say that's a little excessive. That's probably a fan attitude, but I bet you cry once, even if you don't care about Springsteen. So please give Born to Run a shot. You'll become a fan. I know it. So those were my top 10 nonfiction reads of 2016. I've already started 2017 with a nonfiction read. Like I said, I'm doing The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule, a kind of fun nonfiction, but I've got a whole list lined up. Sometimes I go through phases where I want to read a ton of nonfiction and no novels, and I'm kind of in that phase right now, so there's going to be more nonfiction coming up on this channel. Anyway, I hope you guys are having a great Martin Luther King Day, Civil Rights Day, Religious Freedom Day, whatever we're calling it right now, and I will see you guys later.